The morning mist hung heavy over Buckingham Palace as Commander James Hartwell adjusted his ceremonial sword one final time. 25 years of loyal service to the crown had led to this moment, the most difficult decision of his military career. The weight of the sealed envelope in his breast pocket felt heavier than any armor he had ever worn. Inside the private study, Queen Camilla sat reviewing state papers, unaware that her reign was about to face its greatest challenge. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking what would be her final hours as the undisputed monarch of the United Kingdom. The crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier when investigative journalist Sarah Mitchell published a series of explosive articles in The Guardian. Her months of painstaking research had uncovered a web of financial irregularities dating back to before Camilla's coronation. The evidence suggested that substantial sums from royal charities had been diverted to offshore accounts, with the Queen's personal signature appearing on numerous suspicious transactions. Commander Hartwell had initially dismissed the allegations as tabloid sensationalism. The media had always harbored resentment toward Camilla, viewing her as an outsider who had somehow maneuvered her way to the throne after Charles's unexpected abdication. However, as more evidence emerged and Parliament demanded answers, even the Queen's most loyal supporters began to question her innocence. The breaking point came when Dame Elizabeth Thornton, the palace's most trusted financial advisor for over 30 years, requested an urgent meeting with the Royal Guard's senior command. Her hands trembled as she placed a folder of documents on the mahogany table, her voice barely above a whisper as she revealed the truth that would shake the monarchy to its core. The documents showed a pattern of deception that spanned nearly a decade. Charity funds meant for children's hospitals had been redirected through a complex network of shell companies. Veterans' support programs had been systematically drained of resources. Most damaging of all, emergency relief funds designated for natural disaster victims had been channeled into personal investments that had made Camilla's private wealth soar to unprecedented levels. Dame Elizabeth's investigation revealed that the Queen had used her position to authorize these transfers during periods when Parliament was in recess, making oversight nearly impossible. The sophisticated nature of the scheme suggested careful planning and intimate knowledge of royal financial protocols. What made the betrayal even more painful was that many of the affected charities bore the names of causes Camilla had publicly championed. Commander Hartwell spent sleepless nights reviewing the evidence, consulting with constitutional lawyers, and seeking guidance from former palace officials. The weight of tradition pressed down upon him like a crushing burden. Never in British history had the Royal Guard been called upon to take such drastic action against a reigning monarch. The constitutional crisis deepened when Prime Minister Margaret Ashworth called for an emergency session of Parliament. The opposition demanded immediate answers, while government supporters urged caution and due process. The press camped outside palace gates, their cameras ready to capture any sign of the growing turmoil within the royal household. Prince William, who had maintained a carefully neutral public stance throughout the controversy, found himself caught between loyalty to his stepmother and his duty to the crown. Private conversations with constitutional scholars had made clear that the monarchy's survival might depend on swift and decisive action. The institution that had weathered world wars and social revolutions now faced a threat from within its own walls. As the evidence mounted, Commander Hartwell realized that his oath to protect the crown meant more than protecting any individual monarch. It meant preserving the integrity of an institution that millions of people around the world looked to for stability and moral leadership. The documents in Dame Elizabeth's folder represented not just financial crimes, but a fundamental betrayal of the trust that formed the foundation of the monarchy itself. The Royal Guard's senior officers met in emergency session, their faces grave as they considered options that had never been contemplated in their training. Military lawyers explained the unprecedented legal territory they were entering, while historians provided context from other constitutional monarchies that had faced similar crises. The consensus was clear. Action had to be taken, regardless of the personal cost to those involved. On a gray Tuesday morning, as London awakened to another day of political uncertainty, Commander Hartwell received the final piece of evidence that would seal Queen Camilla's fate. A whistleblower within the palace accounting department had provided bank statements showing direct transfers from royal accounts to Camilla's personal holdings on the very day a children's cancer ward had been forced to close due to lack of funding. The commander's hands shook as he read the documents, his military composure finally cracking under the weight of the revelation. The woman he had sworn to protect had systematically betrayed everything the monarchy was supposed to represent. The children who had suffered, the veterans who had been denied care, the disaster victims who had received inadequate aid, all so that one person could accumulate personal wealth beyond imagination. That evening, as Camilla attended a state dinner with visiting dignitaries, unaware that her world was about to collapse, Commander Hartwell made the most difficult phone call of his career. Prince William listened in stunned silence as the full scope of the evidence was explained to him. The conversation lasted over 2 hours, with constitutional experts providing guidance on the unprecedented steps that would need to be taken. The final preparations began at midnight, with trusted Royal Guard officers quietly securing key palace locations and communication systems. By dawn, the carefully coordinated operation would be in motion, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever change the British monarchy and thrust Prince William into a role he had never expected to assume under such circumstances. The confrontation began at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning when Commander Hartwell knocked on the door of the Queen's private chambers. Camilla, still in her silk dressing gown, looked surprised to see the senior Royal Guard officer accompanied by 2 constitutional lawyers and Dame Elizabeth Thornton. The gravity of their expressions immediately told her that this was no routine security briefing. Commander Hartwell's voice remained steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. The formal words of suspension rolled off his tongue with military precision, each syllable carrying the weight of centuries of royal protocol. Queen Camilla's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a calculating coldness that confirmed the worst fears about her character. Her first instinct was denial, her voice rising in indignation as she demanded explanations and threatened consequences for what she called a treasonous conspiracy. However, as Dame Elizabeth methodically laid out the financial evidence on the ornate coffee table, the Queen's protests became increasingly hollow. Bank statements, forged authorizations, and money transfer records painted an undeniable picture of systematic fraud that had continued for years. The most damaging evidence came in the form of recorded phone conversations that had been captured by routine palace security systems. Camilla's voice could be clearly heard instructing financial advisors to move charity funds into personal investment accounts, often while expressing mock concern for the very causes she was stealing from. Her callous laughter at one point, when discussing the closure of a children's hospital wing, revealed a level of cruelty that shocked even her harshest critics. Prince William arrived at the palace within the hour, his face pale but determined as he was briefed on the full scope of the crisis. The evidence against his stepmother was overwhelming, but the constitutional implications of what was happening weighed heavily on his shoulders. Constitutional scholars had worked through the night to provide guidance on the unprecedented transfer of power that was about to take place. The legal mechanism being invoked was an obscure provision from the Regency Act, modified by emergency powers that had never before been used in peacetime. The Royal Guard's authority to act stemmed from their primary duty to protect the crown as an institution, even when that meant protecting it from the reigning monarch. Parliament would need to ratify the action, but the immediate transfer of power could proceed under emergency protocols established during World War II. Camilla's attempts to contact her private lawyers were blocked by palace security, while her personal staff were quietly dismissed and escorted from the premises. The speed and efficiency of the operation reflected months of careful planning that had remained hidden from the Queen herself. Every potential escape route had been anticipated and closed off, ensuring that the evidence could not be destroyed or witnesses intimidated. The media frenzy outside the palace gates intensified as word of the unprecedented events began to leak out. Reporters who had covered the royal family for decades struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding. Social media exploded with speculation and rumors, while international news networks scrambled to provide coverage of what was quickly being called the greatest constitutional crisis in modern British history. Inside the palace, Prince William met privately with Camilla in what would be their final conversation as stepmother and stepson. The 40-minute discussion remained confidential, but witnesses reported hearing raised voices and, at one point, what sounded like sobbing. When William emerged from the room, his face was set in grim determination, and he formally accepted the emergency transfer of royal authority. The transformation of the palace hierarchy happened with remarkable speed. Camilla's personal guards were replaced with officers loyal to Prince William, while her access to royal communications and financial systems was immediately terminated. The symbolic changing of the guard took place with military precision, each movement choreographed to ensure there could be no reversal of the process once it had begun. By noon, Camilla had been escorted to a secure wing of the palace where she would remain under house arrest pending formal charges. Her royal titles were suspended immediately, though the complex legal process of permanent removal would take weeks to complete. The crown jewels were secured, and all royal seals and official documents were transferred to Prince William's control. The international reaction was swift and dramatic. Commonwealth leaders expressed shock and concern about the stability of the monarchy, while Republican movements in several countries saw the crisis as validation of their opposition to hereditary rule. The British pound fell sharply on international markets, and emergency sessions were called in Parliament, Canada, Australia, and other Commonwealth nations. Prince William's first act as emergency regent was to order a complete audit of all royal finances and charitable operations. Teams of forensic accountants began the painstaking process of tracing every questionable transaction and identifying the full scope of the financial damage. Early estimates suggested that over £50 million had been diverted from charitable causes over the past 8 years. The human cost of Camilla's crimes became clear as investigators contacted the affected charities. Hospitals had been forced to cancel surgeries, veterans' housing programs had been suspended, and disaster relief operations had been critically underfunded. The stories of individual victims, children denied medical treatment, homeless veterans sleeping in the streets, flood victims left without adequate shelter, provided a heartbreaking context to the cold financial figures. Dame Elizabeth Thornton, despite her role in exposing the crimes, struggled with the personal betrayal she felt. She had worked closely with Camilla for years, often admiring what she thought was the Queen's dedication to charitable causes. The revelation that every expression of concern had been an act, every charitable appearance a cover for theft, left her questioning her own judgment and the nature of the people she had served. The Royal Guard faced its own internal challenges as the unprecedented action divided loyalties among the ranks. Some officers struggled with the concept of acting against a reigning monarch, even one whose crimes were undeniable. Commander Hartwell found himself defending the decision in multiple meetings with subordinates, explaining that their oath to the crown superseded personal loyalty to any individual ruler. As evening fell on that historic day, Prince William addressed the nation in a televised broadcast that would be remembered as one of the most important royal speeches in modern history. Speaking from the throne room with the weight of sudden responsibility visible in his bearing, he acknowledged the gravity of the situation while promising to restore integrity to the monarchy and ensure that such betrayal could never happen again. The speech lasted 15 minutes, during which William carefully explained the evidence against Camilla while emphasizing his commitment to transparency and justice. He announced the establishment of an independent commission to oversee royal finances and promised that every penny stolen from charity would be repaid from royal personal funds. The measured tone and obvious sincerity of his words began the long process of restoring public confidence in the institution of the monarchy. The formal transfer of the crown took place 6 weeks after Camilla's arrest, following a series of parliamentary sessions that would reshape the British Constitution forever. Westminster Hall filled with peers, members of Parliament, and international dignitaries as Prince William prepared to accept full royal authority under circumstances no one had ever imagined possible. The ancient ceremony was modified to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of his ascension to the throne. Camilla's legal battles had dominated headlines throughout the interim period, as her team of expensive lawyers struggled to mount a defense against overwhelming evidence. The Crown Prosecution Service had filed charges including fraud, embezzlement, breach of public trust, and conspiracy. Each charge carried significant prison time, and the cumulative effect meant that the former queen faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. The trial itself became a media spectacle unlike anything the British legal system had ever witnessed. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of Camilla's crimes, with witnesses testifying about instructions to falsify documents, create fraudulent charities, and manipulate royal accounting systems. The most damaging testimony came from her personal assistant of 12 years, who revealed recorded conversations where Camilla laughed about stupid people who donated to causes she was systematically looting. Public opinion had shifted dramatically as the full extent of the betrayal became clear. Initial shock and confusion gave way to anger and then to a surprising surge of support for Prince William's decisive action. Polls showed that nearly 70% of the population approved of the Royal Guard's intervention, with many expressing relief that the monarchy had demonstrated the ability to police itself when necessary. The international ramifications continued to unfold as other royal families quietly conducted their own financial audits to ensure they would not face similar scandals. The Spanish, Dutch, and Swedish monarchies all announced enhanced oversight procedures, while Republican movements in several countries used the British crisis to renew their calls for the abolition of hereditary rule. However, Prince William's handling of the situation actually strengthened the monarchy in many Commonwealth nations, where his quick action was seen as proof that the institution could adapt and reform itself. King William, as he was now formally known, faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding public trust while managing the ongoing constitutional crisis. His first major reform was the creation of the Royal Transparency Commission, an independent body with sweeping powers to audit all royal finances and charitable activities. The commission included representatives from Parliament, the judiciary, and civil society, ensuring that no future monarch could operate without rigorous oversight. The financial restitution process proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Tracing the stolen funds required forensic accounting teams to work across multiple jurisdictions, as Camilla had used offshore banking networks to hide her theft. Swiss banks, Caribbean financial institutions, and Dubai investment firms all became involved in the painstaking process of recovering money that had been moved through dozens of shell companies and fake charitable organizations. Dame Elizabeth Thornton led the restitution effort, working 18-hour days to ensure that every affected charity received full compensation. The emotional toll of meeting with victims of Camilla's crimes weighed heavily on everyone involved in the recovery process. Hospital administrators described children who had died waiting for treatments that could have been funded with the stolen money, while veterans advocates told stories of homeless former soldiers who had been denied shelter and support. The royal family itself underwent a period of intense self-examination and reform. King William instituted regular financial audits, transparent reporting of all royal expenditures, and enhanced oversight of charitable activities. Every member of the royal family was required to submit to background checks and ongoing monitoring, ensuring that the institution would never again be vulnerable to the kind of systematic corruption that had nearly destroyed it. Camilla's sentencing hearing drew international attention as she faced the consequences of her actions. The judge's statement lasted over an hour, detailing the systematic nature of her crimes and the devastating impact on countless victims. The sentence of 25 years in prison shocked even those who had followed the case closely, but legal experts noted that the severity reflected both the magnitude of the financial crimes and the breach of public trust involved in stealing from charities. The former queen's fall from grace was complete when she was transferred to HMP Bronzefield, a women's prison in Surrey, where she would serve her sentence alongside common criminals. The contrast with her former life of luxury and privilege could not have been more stark. Prison officials confirmed that she would receive no special treatment beyond the security measures necessary to ensure her safety. King William's coronation, when it finally took place 8 months after the crisis began, was deliberately modest compared to previous royal ceremonies. The new monarch used the occasion to emphasize themes of service, accountability, and transparency. His coronation oath included new provisions promising to submit to independent oversight and to ensure that royal resources would never again be misused for personal gain. The long-term impact of the crisis extended far beyond the British monarchy itself. Constitutional scholars around the world studied the precedent established by the Royal Guard's intervention, recognizing that it had created new possibilities for institutional self-correction in other hereditary systems. Law schools added courses examining the constitutional implications of the case, while political scientists debated whether similar mechanisms should be built into other governmental systems. Public support for the monarchy actually increased in the aftermath of the crisis, as King William's handling of the situation demonstrated that the institution could reform itself when necessary. Opinion polls showed that the royal family's approval ratings had reached their highest levels in decades, with many people expressing appreciation for the new transparency and accountability measures that had been implemented. The charities that had been robbed by Camilla slowly began to recover, using the restituted funds to restart programs that had been suspended and expand services to help those who had suffered during the years of systematic theft. Children's hospitals reopened wings that had been closed, veterans' housing programs resumed operations, and disaster relief organizations rebuilt their capacity to respond to emergencies. Commander Hartwell, who had initiated the unprecedented action against Camilla, was promoted and awarded the Victoria Cross for his courage in placing duty to the crown above personal loyalty. His decision to act on the evidence, despite the enormous personal and professional risks involved, was recognized as one of the most important moments in the modern history of the British military's relationship with the monarchy. As the first anniversary of Camilla's arrest approached, King William reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed both his life and the institution he now led. The monarchy had survived its greatest internal threat in centuries, emerging stronger and more accountable than ever before. The painful lessons learned from the crisis would ensure that future generations of royals would serve with the knowledge that their actions would always be subject to scrutiny and that no one, regardless of their position, was above the law. The British people had witnessed their constitutional system adapt to an unprecedented challenge, proving that even ancient institutions could evolve and reform themselves when necessary. The crown that passed to King William was different from the one that Camilla had betrayed, but it was also more legitimate, more transparent, and more worthy of the trust that millions of people continued to place in the monarchy as a symbol of national unity and continuity.